the dead of night, when the world falls silent, the shadows whispered tales too dark for daylight. Welcome to Shadows of the Past, where we unravel true crime stories that linger like ghosts in the corners of your mind. Tonight, in Volume 45, we dive into 5 chilling cases. Empires built on greed, betrayal, and human suffering. These are not just stories, they're warnings etched in blood. Tales of men who thought they could outrun justice. From the sun-scorched deserts of Mexico to the rain-soaked streets of London, we'll follow the threads of their crimes, each one a knot in a web of corruption and despair. As the rain falls outside, let these stories pull you into a world where trust is a luxury and survival is a gamble. Close your eyes, but don't drift too far, because in the darkness, the past is always watching. Settle in and let's begin with a man they called El Fantasma, a ghost who cast a shadow over 2 continents until one mistake brought his empire crashing down. Part 1, The Ghost of the Border, Miguel El Fantasma Rivera. The desert stretches endlessly under a merciless sun, where the line between life and death blurs with every step. This is the borderlands, a place where dreams go to die, and where Miguel Rivera, known as El Fantasma, built an empire on the bones of the desperate. By 2010, Rivera was a phantom in every sense. No fingerprints, no records, no face in any database. To the authorities, he was a myth, a name whispered in fear by those who knew better than to speak too loudly. But to the cartels, the smugglers, and the broken souls caught in his web, he was very real, a shadow that moved unseen, orchestrating a network that trafficked drugs and human lives with surgical precision. Rivera's story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper. Born in the dusty streets of Ciudad Juarez, he grew up in the shadow of the cartels, watching as they turned his city into a battlefield. As a boy, he saw his brother gunned down in a turf war, his mother broken by grief. Most would have crumbled, but Rivera was different. He learned early that power wasn't in the gun, it was in the mind. By his 20s, he was no thug, he was a strategist, a chess player, in a game where the pieces were human lives. He didn't just want to survive the cartels, he wanted to outsmart them. By the early 2000s, Rivera had carved out a niche, moving small shipments of cocaine across the U.S. and Mexico border. But he wasn't like the others, where rival traffickers relied on brute force. Rivera used deception. He forged identities, bribed officials, and built a network of front companies. Trucking firms, import-export businesses, even a chain of laundromats that hid his operations in plain sight. He was meticulous, obsessive even, ensuring every detail was accounted for. A single misplaced document could unravel everything, and Rivera left nothing to chance. His rise was quiet but relentless. By 2010, Rivera's network spanned both coasts of the United States, from San Diego to Miami, with tendrils reaching into South America and Europe. Cocaine and heroin flowed like rivers, but Rivera saw a new market, one even more lucrative than drugs: human trafficking. The border was a sieve, and desperate migrants were pouring through, fleeing violence, poverty, or both. Rivera saw opportunity where others saw tragedy. He built a pipeline promising safe passage to the U.S. for a price. Families handed over life savings only to find themselves packed into sweltering trucks, abandoned in the desert, or worse, sold into labor or sex trafficking on the other side. What made Rivera untouchable was his structure. He didn't just run an organization, he engineered a machine. His network operated like a corporation, with layers of intermediaries, couriers, accountants, enforcers who rarely knew who they were working for. Rivera himself was a ghost, communicating through encrypted phones and disposable burners. He lived modestly, moving between safe houses and border towns, never staying long enough to draw attention. To the world, he was a nobody. To his empire, he was God. But gods can fall, and Rivera's empire was built on a fragile foundation: trust. His lieutenants, men like Javier Morales, Sofia Vega, and Carlos Salazar, were loyal. But loyalty in the underworld is a currency easily spent. Rivera kept them in line with fear and money, but he knew better than to trust them completely. He had eyes everywhere, informants within his own ranks, corrupt cops on his payroll, even hackers who monitored digital trails. Yet, for all his paranoia, Rivera couldn't control everything. The first crack appeared in 2018, in a way so mundane it almost seemed laughable. A low-level courier, a nervous kid named Eduardo, forgot to lock his phone. He'd been careless, texting a girlfriend about a big job for the boss. The message was vague, but it was enough to catch the eye of a local cop in El Paso who'd been tipped off about a suspicious truck. The cop, part of a joint task force with the DEA, pulled Eduardo over on a routine stop. The kid panicked, handed over the phone, and within hours, the authorities had a thread to pull. That thread led to a warehouse in Juarez, where agents found crates of heroin stamped with a symbol, a stylized ghost. It was Rivera's signature, a mark he'd used to brand his product. The bust was small, barely a dent in his operation, but it was the first time anyone had connected physical evidence to El Fantasma. The DEA, FBI, and Mexican authorities pounced, pooling resources in a task force dubbed Operation Spectre. They knew they weren't just chasing a man. They were hunting a myth. For months, the task force worked in secrecy, tracking shipments, tapping phones, and infiltrating Rivera's network. They turned low-level operatives, offering immunity for information, but Rivera's structure held firm. His lieutenants were insulated, his communications encrypted. Every lead seemed to vanish into the desert, like footprints erased by the wind. Agents began to wonder if El Fantasma was even real, or if they were chasing a collective of criminals hiding behind a single name. Then came the breakthrough. In early 2019, a woman named Ana Morales, no relation to Javiera, walked into a police station in San Diego. She was gaunt, her eyes hollow, her arms scarred from years of abuse. Ana had been trafficked by Rivera's network, smuggled from Honduras with promises of a job in California. Instead, she'd been sold to a brothel in Los Angeles. Her passport burned, her family threatened. She'd escaped after a client, a remorseful regular, helped her slip away. Ana didn't know Rivera's name, but she knew details, routes, even the ghost symbol on the crates she'd seen during her journey. Ana's testimony was a map. It led the task force to a trucking company in Tucson, one of Rivera's fronts. Undercover agents posed as drivers, gaining access to the company's records. They found coded ledgers, false manifests, and a pattern of shipments that matched Ana's story. The trail pointed east, to a quiet suburb in Florida where a nondescript house sat behind a white picket fence. It was one of Rivera's safe houses, a place he used to oversee his East Coast operation. On a muggy night in July 2019, the task force moved in. They expected a firefight, but the house was eerily quiet. Inside, they found Rivera alone, sitting at a kitchen table, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't resist, didn't speak. His face was calm, almost amused, as if he'd been expecting them. The man who'd evaded capture for a decade was finally in cuffs, but the victory felt hollow. Rivera's empire was too vast, too decentralized to collapse with his arrest. As agents combed through the house, they found a treasure trove. Laptops, burner phones, and a handwritten journal. The journal was Rivera's mind laid bare. Plans, contingencies, even philosophical musings about power and survival. One entry stood out. The ghost doesn't die. The ghost becomes the system. It was a chilling prophecy, and it proved true. Even as Rivera sat in a cell, his network kept running. Morales, Vega, and Salazar scrambled to fill the void, each vying for control. Shipments continued, victims were still trafficked, and the ghost's shadow stretched on. Rivera's trial was a spectacle, but he remained an enigma. He spoke little, his lawyer arguing he was a scapegoat, a myth built by desperate authorities. The evidence, though, was overwhelming. Ana's testimony, combined with the journal and digital records, painted a portrait of a man who'd orchestrated suffering on an industrial scale. In 2020, Rivera was sentenced to life without parole, locked away in a supermax, but his words haunted the prosecutors. The ghost becomes the system. The task force kept working, dismantling pieces of the network, but it was like fighting a hydra. Cut off one head and two more grew. Ana, now in witness protection, tried to rebuild her life, but the nightmares never left. She spoke of the desert, of the faces she'd seen in those trucks, people who never made it out. Her voice was one of thousands, a chorus of survivors who carried the weight of Rivera's crimes. In the years that followed, the authorities uncovered more of Rivera's reach. His network had bribed officials in 3 countries, laundered money through shell companies in Panama, and trafficked over 10,000 people in a single decade. The drugs alone were valued at billions. Yet, for all the numbers, it was the human cost that lingered. Families torn apart, lives erased, dreams turned to ash in the desert sun. Rivera, from his cell, reportedly smiled when asked about his legacy. "You think he stopped me?" he said to a visiting journalist. "Look around, the world still hungers." He was right, in a way. The demand for drugs and cheap labor kept the machine turning, with new phantoms rising to take his place. Morales was caught in 2021, Vega vanished, and Salazar was killed in a turf war. But the system, the ghost, lived on. As we leave Rivera's story, picture that desert again, vast and unforgiving. The sun sets, casting long shadows across the sand. Somewhere out there, another truck rumbles through the night, carrying its cargo of dreams and despair. The ghost is gone, but his echo remains, a reminder that some empires don't fall, they just change hands. Stay with us as we move to the next shadow, a man who turned the night itself into his weapon. Part 2, The Night's Architect, Javier el Fantasma Morales. The rain falls harder now, a steady drumbeat against the world, washing away the traces of the day. But some stains run too deep to be cleansed. In the shadows of the night, where secrets fester and trust is a blade waiting to cut, one man built an empire that thrived in darkness. His name was Javier Morales, but to those who feared him, he was El Fantasma, the ghost who moved through borders and lived with the ease of a specter. This is the story of Operas Nocturna, a syndicate that wove drugs, human suffering, and corruption into a tapestry of terror and the relentless pursuit to bring its architect to justice. Javier Morales was not born a monster. In the cramped, sunless alleys of Bogota, he grew up in the 1980s, a child of chaos in a city choking on cartel violence. His father, a low-level smuggler, vanished when Javier was 10, leaving behind a mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Young Javier learned early that survival demanded cunning, not strength. He ran errands for local dealers, his sharp eyes and quick tongue earning him a reputation as a kid who could get things done. By his teens, he wasn't just surviving the underworld. He was studying it, memorizing its rules, its weaknesses, its hungers. Morales was no thug. He was a planner, a man who saw the world as a puzzle to be solved. In his 20s, he joined a mid-tier cartel, not as muscle, but as a strategist. He mapped smuggling routes, negotiated with corrupt officials, and devised ways to hide shipments in plain sight. His mind was his weapon, and it was lethal. By the early 2000s, Operas Nocturna operations. The name was a promise, a vow that his work would thrive under the cover of darkness, unseen by the eyes of the law. Operas Nocturna was unlike any cartel before it. Morales didn't believe in empires built on loyalty or fear. Those were too fragile, too human. Instead, he designed a system, a cellular structure where each unit operated independently, unaware of the others. Couriers, traffickers, accountants, and enforcers worked in silos, connected only by coded messages and dead drops. Morales himself was a ghost within his own creation, rarely meeting his operatives, communicating through encrypted channels that vanished like smoke. If one cell was compromised, the others carried on, untouched. It was a masterpiece of paranoia and precision. The syndicate's trade was twofold: drugs and people. Cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine flowed from South America to North America, Europe, and Asia, hidden in everything from coffee shipments to children's toys. Morales' genius lay in his logistics. He used legitimate businesses, shipping companies, textile exporters, even a chain of bakeries to mask his operations. His drugs crossed oceans in containers marked as humanitarian aid. His profits laundered through offshore accounts and cryptocurrency. By 2010, Operas Nocturna was moving billions, its reach as vast as the night sky. But drugs were only half the story. Morales saw human trafficking as the future, a market with endless supply and insatiable demand. He preyed on the desperate, refugees from war-torn regions, impoverished families, runaway teens. His recruiters, often charming men and women trained to lie, promised jobs, safety, and new life. Instead, victims were smuggled across borders, their passports burned, their families threatened. Women and children were sold into sex trafficking, men into forced labor. Morales controlled them, not just with violence, but with debt and despair, chaining them to a life they couldn't escape. What made Morales untouchable was his invisibility. He lived modestly, moving between apartments in Bogota, Istanbul, and Miami, never staying long. He avoided the flash of other kingpins, no mansions, no gold chains. To the world, he was a businessman, a vague figure dealing in imports. To his network, he was a myth, a voice on a secure line, a name that carried the weight of death. He bribed officials in a dozen countries, from port authorities to judges, ensuring his shipments passed unmolested. Those who betrayed him didn't live long enough to regret it. Yet for all his brilliance, Morales' empire had a flaw: its scale. Opera's Nocturna was too vast, too complex to be flawless. Every shipment, every bribe, every victim was a potential crack in the facade. Morales knew this, and his paranoia grew with his wealth. He monitored his lieutenants, men like Esteban Rojas and Felipe Vargas, through spies and wiretaps, trusting no one. But even a ghost can't see every shadow, and in 2016, one small mistake set the stage for his downfall. It started in Miami, a city that pulses with secrets. A routine drug bust at the port uncovered a shipment of cocaine hidden in a crate of tropical fruit. The haul was modest, but the paperwork was sloppy, a rare oversight for Morales' machine. The manifest led to a shell company, one of dozens he used to launder money. The DEA, already sniffing around Miami's smuggling routes, dug deeper. They found bank transactions, coded emails, and a name: Felipe Vargas, Morales' financial architect. Vargas was careful but not careful enough. A single wire transfer flagged by an analyst linked him to a trafficking ring in Istanbul. The discovery was a spark, igniting a global investigation. The DEA teamed up with Interpol, Turkish police, and Europol, forming a task force to hunt Opera's Nocturna. They called it Operation Nightfall, a nod to Morales' Empire of Darkness. For months, they chased leads across continents, piecing together a network that seemed to defy logic. Shipments traced from Colombia to Spain, victims rescued in Thailand, bribes uncovered in Panama. It was a labyrinth, and Morales was at its heart, always just out of reach. The task force faced a problem: Morales' cellular structure. Busting a courier or seizing a shipment barely dented the operation. Each cell was a dead end. Its members knowing only their immediate contacts. The authorities needed someone inside, someone high enough to see the bigger picture. Enter Samir Khalil, a mid-level operative in Morales' European arm. Khalil was a smuggler, ruthless but disillusioned, tired of the bloodshed. In 2016, Interpol caught him in Amsterdam with a kilo of heroin. Facing life in prison, Khalil made a deal. He'd talk, but only if they protected his family. Khalil's information was gold. He didn't know Morales' face, but he knew routes, safe houses, and the names of key players. He described a system of ghost ledgers, encrypted files that tracked every transaction, every victim. The task force used Khalil's intel to stage raids in Lisbon, Bangkok, and Miami, rescuing dozens of trafficked women and seizing millions in drugs. Each raid brought them closer, but Morales was a step ahead, vanishing before they could strike. He fled to Istanbul, a city where money could buy anonymity, planning to disappear into Russia. But the net was tightening. In early 2017, a Turkish informant tipped off Interpol about a man matching Morales' description. He was living in a nondescript apartment in Istanbul's Old Quarter, under a false name. The task force moved fast, coordinating with Turkish special forces. On a rainy night in March, they stormed the building. Morales didn't fight, didn't run. He sat calmly, a cup of tea in his hand, as if he'd known this moment was coming. The ghost had been caught, but his empire was far from dead. The raid yielded a trove of evidence: laptops, thumb drives, and a single notebook filled with cryptic notes. Decrypting the data took months, but it revealed the scope of Opera's Nocturna. The syndicate had trafficked over 15,000 people in a decade, moved drugs worth $4 billion, 0 cents, and bribed officials in 20 countries. Morales' trial in 2018 was a global event, broadcast from The Hague. He faced charges of drug trafficking, human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. His defense claimed he was a scapegoat, a figurehead for a faceless network. But the evidence, Khalil's testimony, the ghost ledgers, and survivor accounts, was a tidal wave. One survivor, a woman named Elena, stood out. She'd been trafficked from Venezuela at 19, lured by a job offer as a nanny. Instead, she was sold into a brothel in Madrid, her life reduced to a ledger entry. Elena escaped after 2 years, helped by a sympathetic client. Her testimony was searing, her voice steady as she described Morales' system. The recruiters, the threats, the ghost symbol on the crates that haunted her nightmare. He didn't just steal my life, she said. He stole my soul. Morales was sentenced to life without parole. locked in a high-security prison in the Netherlands. But Operas Nocturna didn't die. Esteban Rojas Morales' enforcer tried to seize control but was killed in a power struggle in 2019. Felipe Vargas, the financier, kept the money flowing until 2020, when the Panama Papers exposed his accounts. He was arrested in Dubai, but not before transferring the ghost ledgers to a new player, a shadowy figure known only as Spectre. The task force kept fighting, but the syndicate evolved. A new group, the Ghost Syndicate, emerged using Morales' playbook, but with digital tools. Dark web marketplaces, encrypted apps, and cryptocurrency. The authorities were playing catch-up, chasing a ghost that had learned to haunt the internet. Elena, now an advocate, worked with journalists to uncover the ledgers, risking her life to expose Spectre's clients, politicians, CEOs, and criminals who thrived in the shadows. As Morales sat in his cell, he reportedly laughed when asked about his legacy. "The night doesn't end," he said. "It just gets darker." He was right. The demand for drugs and human lives kept the machine turning, with new architects ready to build on his foundation. The task force rescued hundreds, but thousands remained trapped, their cries drowned out by the rain. Elena's fight continued, her voice a beacon in the dark. She spoke of the girls she'd met in that brothel, the ones who didn't make it out. "They're still out there," she told a reporter, "and I won't stop until they're free." Her words were a challenge, a reminder that the night may belong to monsters, but the dawn belongs to those who fight. Picture that Istanbul apartment, rain streaking the windows, the ghost tea growing cold. The man is gone, but his system lives, a shadow that stretches across oceans. As we leave Morales behind, the rain keeps falling, carrying us to the next story, a man who turned Australia's shores into a graveyard for dreams. Stay with us, for the darkness has more to tell. Part 3, The Outlaw's Ocean. Danny O'Keefe. The rain whispers against the window, a restless lullaby for a world that never sleeps. Beyond the glass, the ocean stretches, vast and unforgiving, its waves carrying secrets too heavy to surface. In the land where the sea meets the sun, Australia's endless coastline became a battleground for a man who turned its shores into a gateway for despair. His name was Daniel O'Keefe, but those who feared him called him Danny, a name that carried the weight of 1,000 broken lives. This is the story of a criminal empire that thrived on the edge of the world, a tale of drugs, human suffering, and a chase that spanned continents. Welcome to the shadowed waters of Danny O'Keefe's reign. Daniel O'Keefe was not born to crime, but he was shaped by it. In the working-class suburbs of Sydney, the 1980s were a crucible of struggle. Danny grew up in a cramped house, the youngest of 5, with a father who drank away the family's meager savings and a mother who worked nights to keep the lights on. School was a battleground, and Danny, small but scrappy, learned to fight with his wits as much as his fists. By 15, he was running with a crew of petty thieves, boosting cars and fencing stolen goods. But Danny was different. He didn't crave the thrill. He craved control. In his 20s, Danny drifted to Darwin, a port city where the ocean promised opportunity. He started small, smuggling cigarettes and booze to dodge taxes, but his ambition burned brighter than the tropical sun. By the early 2000s, he'd caught the eye of a local syndicate, men who moved harder cargo, cocaine, methamphetamine, and the occasional shipment of guns. Danny didn't just join them, he studied them, learning the art of smuggling like a scholar. He saw the ocean not as a barrier but as a highway, and Australia's 25,000 kilometers of coastline is an open door. By 2015, Danny O'Keefe was no longer a small-time hustler. He was a kingpin, the architect of a smuggling empire that stretched from Southeast Asia to South America. His operation was a marvel of efficiency, using Australia's remote beaches and bustling ports to move drugs and people. Cocaine came from Colombia, meth from Myanmar, opioids from China, all hidden in fishing boats, cargo containers, or even luxury yachts. Danny's genius was his cover. He ran a network of legitimate businesses, shipping firms, seafood exporters, even a yacht charter company that masked his crimes in plain sight. But drugs were only the beginning. Danny saw human trafficking as a gold mine, a market fueled by desperation. His recruiters targeted vulnerable communities in Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines, promising jobs in Australia's booming economy. Families paid thousands for passage, only to find themselves crammed into boats, their dreams drowning in the Timor Sea. Those who survived were sold into labor sites, construction sites, sweatshops, or worse, brothels in Sydney and Melbourne. Danny controlled them with fear, debt, and the threat of deportation. What set Danny apart was his anonymity. He lived quietly in a modest Darwin apartment, drove a used sedan, and avoided the flash of other crime lords. To the world, he was a businessman, a charming Irish Australian with a quick smile. To his network, he was a phantom, communicating through encrypted apps and trusted lieutenants. His inner circle, men like Tommy Nguyen and Rachel Carter, knew only fragments of the operation, ensuring no one could betray the whole. Danny's paranoia was his shield, but it was also his cage. The empire thrived in silence, but silence is fragile. In 2017, a container washed ashore near Darwin, its contents a nightmare. Inside were 200 kilos of methamphetamine, and the bodies of 12 trafficked women suffocated in a hidden compartment. The discovery was a shockwave, splashed across headlines and seared into Australia's conscience. The Australian Federal Police, AFP, launched Operation Tidebreaker, a task force to hunt the mastermind behind the tragedy. They didn't know Danny's name, but they knew his shadow. The container was a rare mistake, a crack in Danny's flawless machine. The AFP traced its origin to a shipping company in Jakarta, one of Danny's fronts. Undercover agents infiltrated the company, posing as dock workers, and found manifests that didn't add up. Shipments to remote Australian ports with no record of delivery. The trail led to a warehouse in Perth, where agents seized cocaine worth $50 million, 0 cents, and rescued 6 trafficked men, half-starved and chained. Each bust was a piece of the puzzle, but Danny remained a ghost. The AFP needed a break, and it came from an unlikely source, Sarah Lim, a 22-year-old from Malaysia. Sarah had been trafficked by Danny's network, lured with a promise of a hotel job in Brisbane. Instead, she was sold to a brothel. Her passport burned, her family threatened. Sarah escaped after a year, slipping away during a police raid on an unrelated case. Terrified but defiant, she walked into an AFP station and told her story. She didn't know Danny's name, but she remembered details, boat routes, a warehouse in Darwin, a man named Tommy with a dragon tattoo. Sarah's testimony was a map. The AFP zeroed in on Tommy Nguyen, Danny's right-hand man. They tailed him for weeks, watching as he met with couriers and bribed port officials. In a risky move, they turned one of Tommy's drivers, a nervous kid named Liam, who'd seen Danny once at a safe house. Liam's intel led to a raid in Cairns, where agents found $20 million, 0 cents in meth, and a ledger with coded names. Decrypting it took months, but it pointed to a yacht moored in Sydney, a floating hub for Danny's deals. The task force moved fast, but Danny was faster. By the time they raided the yacht, he was gone, vanished into the Pacific. For months, he stayed one step ahead, hopping between safe houses in Bali, Thailand, and Chile. The AFP, now working with Interpol and the FBI, tracked his movements through bank records and burner phones. They knew he was planning to disappear for good, likely to a non-extradition country like Russia. The chase was a race against time, and the stakes were lives. In late 2018, the breakthrough came. An informant in Uruguay, a crooked port official, tipped off Interpol about a man using a fake Australian passport. The description matched Danny. Same height, same accent, same cold blue eyes. On a humid night in Montevideo, Uruguayan police stormed a beachfront villa. Danny was there, alone, a half-packed suitcase on the bed. He didn't resist, didn't speak. The man who'd ruled an ocean was cuffed, his empire teetering on the edge. The villa was a gold mine. Laptops, phones, and a safe filled with documents revealed the scope of Danny's operation: $2 billion, 0 cents in drugs, 8,000 trafficked victims, bribes to officials in 6 countries. His trial in 2019 was a media frenzy, held in Sydney under tight security. Danny faced charges of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and racketeering. His defense claimed he was a pawn, a middleman caught in a larger web. But Sarah's testimony, alongside Liam's and the decrypted ledgers, was damning. Sarah took the stand, her voice steady but soft. She spoke of the boat that carried her to Australia, the stench of fear, the men who laughed as they locked her in a room. "He didn't just take my freedom," she said, staring at Danny. "He took my trust in the world." Danny didn't flinch, his face a mask of indifference. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words a chain around his neck. In the end, he was sentenced to life without parole, locked in a maximum security prison in Goulburn. But Danny's story doesn't end there. From his cell, he was already planning. Whispers reached the AFP of a breakout, orchestrated by loyal lieutenants like Rachel Carter. who had evaded capture. In 2020, Danny made his move. During a prison transfer, a staged accident allowed him to slip away, vanishing into the outback. The manhunt was massive, spanning Australia and Southeast Asia, but Danny was gone, a ghost once more. His network, though fractured, kept running, its cells adapting like a virus. Sarah, now in a safe house, carried the scars of her ordeal. She worked with NGOs helping other survivors, but the fear lingered. "He's out there," she told a counselor, "and he's not done." The AFP kept hunting, dismantling Danny's fronts, arresting Tommy Wynn in 2021, but the ocean was vast, and Danny knew its secrets. Rumors placed him in Fiji, then Vietnam, always one wave ahead. The numbers were staggering. $3 billion, 0 cents in drugs, 10,000 victims, an empire that touched 4 continents, but it was the human cost that haunted. Families waited for loved ones who'd never return, their fates lost to the sea. Sarah's voice joined others, a chorus of survivors demanding justice, their stories a beacon in the dark. As we leave Danny's story, imagine that ocean, its waves crashing against a silent shore. Somewhere out there, a boat cuts through the night, its cargo a shadow of despair. Danny O'Keefe may be gone, but the tide he unleashed still flows, carrying new ghosts to distant lands. Stay with us as the rain leads us to the next shadow, a man who turned Australia's heart into a cage for the innocent. Part 4, The Syndicate of Suffering, Benjamin Ben Thomas. The rain falls in sheets now, a curtain of sound that drowns the world in whispers. Beneath its veil, the cities of Australia hum with life, their lights a fragile defiance against the dark. But in the shadows of those streets, where hope is a currency easily stolen, one man built an empire on the ruins of dreams. His name was Benjamin Thomas, known to the underworld as Ben, a name that carried the weight of countless lives crushed under his ambition. This is the story of a criminal syndicate that turned Australia's heart into a cage, a tale of drugs, human trafficking, and a nation's awakening to the horrors within. Welcome to the shadow reign of Ben Thomas. Ben Thomas was not born to darkness, but he embraced it like an old friend. Growing up in the gritty suburbs of Brisbane in the 1980s, he was a quiet kid, the kind who watched more than he spoke. His father was a dock worker, his mother a cleaner, both too tired to notice their son's sharp mind turning toward the streets. By 16, Ben was running with a crew of small-time crooks, stealing cars and selling weed, but Ben wasn't like the others. He didn't chase the rush, he chased power. He saw crime not as a game, but as a business, one he intended to master. In his 20s, Ben moved to Sydney, a city where money flowed and secrets thrived. He started small, smuggling ecstasy into clubs, but his ambition was a fire that burned hotter with every deal. By the early 2000s, he'd caught the attention of international syndicates, men who moved cocaine and heroin across oceans. Ben didn't just join them, he outsmarted them, learning the trade while quietly building his own network. He saw Australia's vast coastline and lax oversight as a gold mine, a land where the law lagged behind the lawless. By 2010, Ben Thomas was a kingpin, the architect of a syndicate that trafficked drugs and people with chilling efficiency. Cocaine, ecstasy, and synthetic opioids poured into Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, hidden in shipping containers, luxury cars, even children's toys. Ben's operation was a masterclass in deception. He ran front businesses, construction firms, nail salons, restaurants, that laundered money and hid his crimes. His drugs fueled Australia's party scene, while his profits built an empire that spanned Southeast Asia and South America. But Ben's true genius was in human trafficking. He saw the desperate refugees, impoverished families, young women from Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam as a renewable resource. His recruiters, often women trained to seem trustworthy, promised jobs in Australia's booming economy. Nannies, cleaners, factory workers. Victims paid thousands, borrowing against their futures, only to be smuggled in cargo holds, their passports burned, their lives sold. Women were forced into brothels, men into construction sites, children into sweatshops. Ben controlled them with debt, violence, and the threat of exposure to immigration authorities. What made Ben untouchable was his web of corruption. He bribed port officials, police, even politicians, ensuring his shipments passed unscrutinized. His network was decentralized. With lieutenants like Samir Malik and Rachel Evans handling day-to-day operations, Ben himself was a shadow, living in a modest Sydney apartment driving a nondescript SUV. He avoided the spotlight, blending into the city's bustle, a businessman to the world, a monster to those trapped in his grip. His paranoia was his armor, but it couldn't shield him forever. The first crack in Ben's empire came in 2013, small but sharp. A routine drug bust in Melbourne uncovered a stash of synthetic opioids in a warehouse. The haul was modest, but the paperwork led to a shipping company, one of Ben's fronts. The Australian Federal Police, AFP, sent something bigger, but Ben was a ghost. No name, no face. Just whispers of a man who moved mountains of misery. The bust sparked Operation Breakwater, a task force to hunt the syndicate's mastermind. They didn't know it yet, but they were chasing Ben Thomas. For a year, the AFP groped in the dark. Ben's network was a labyrinth, its threads vanishing into shell companies and coded ledgers. They seized shipments, arrested couriers, but each lead was a dead end. Ben was always one step ahead, his informants tipping him off to raids, his hackers erasing digital trails. The task force grew frustrated, their board of clues a tangle of names and places. They knew the syndicate was trafficking people, reports of missing migrants were piling up, but proving it was like catching smoke. Then, in early 2015, the horror broke through. A container washed ashore near Perth, its contents a nightmare that would haunt Australia. Inside were 200 kilos of methamphetamine and dozens of women and children packed into a hidden compartment, half dead from heat and suffocation. Some didn't survive, their bodies a silent accusation. The discovery was a national scandal, headlines screaming of a human cargo crisis. The AFP, now under public pressure, doubled down, vowing to dismantle the syndicate. The container was a turning point. Forensic teams combed through it, finding fingerprints, DNA, and a shipping manifest linked to a front company in Sydney. The AFP infiltrated the company, posing as drivers, and uncovered a network of safe houses, basements, back rooms, and abandoned warehouses where victims were held. Raids in Sydney and Brisbane rescued dozens. Their stories, of course, of terror, promises of jobs, brutal journeys, lives reduced to commodity. The task force had proof of human trafficking, but Ben remained elusive, a name no one knew. The breakthrough came from Maria, a 24-year-old from the Philippines. Maria had been lured by a recruiter promising a job in a Melbourne salon. Instead, she was sold to a brothel, her passport taken, her family threatened. For a year, she endured unimaginable abuse until an undercover cop posing as a client helped her escape. Maria's courage was a beacon. She walked into an AFP station, her voice trembling but resolute, and told her story. The boat, the safe house, a man named Samir with a scar on his cheek. Maria's testimony was a roadmap. The AFP targeted Samir Malik, Ben's enforcer, tailing him through Melbourne's underworld. Samir was careful but not careful enough. A wiretap caught him discussing a shipment, mentioning a boss in Sydney. The task force traced the call to a warehouse in Darling Harbour, where they found $30 million, 0 cents in cocaine, and 10 trafficked women locked in a hidden room. The raid was a blow, but Ben slipped away, warned by an informant. The AFP was closing in, but Ben was a master of evasion. He moved between safe houses using false identities and burner phones. The task force, now working with Interpol and the FBI, tracked his finances, finding offshore accounts in the Caymans. They turned a low-level accountant, a nervous woman named Lisa, who'd seen Ben at a meeting. Lisa's intel led to a raid in Adelaide, where agents seized opioids and rescued 6 children, their eyes hollow with fear. Each bus brought them closer, but Ben was a ghost, always one step ahead. In 2016, the final piece fell into place. An informant within Ben's inner circle, a disillusioned courier named Alex, betrayed him. Alex had seen too much. Bodies in containers, children in chains, and his conscience broke. He tipped off the AFP about a safe house in New South Wales, a remote farmhouse where Ben was hiding. On December 4, 2016, the task force struck. The raid was swift, the farmhouse surrounded under a moonless sky. Ben was alone, a glass of wine in his hand, his face calm as they cuffed him. The kingpin was caught, but his empire's shadow lingered. The farmhouse was a treasure trove, laptops, ledgers, and a safe filled with cash and fake passports. Decrypting the data revealed a syndicate that had trafficked 12,000 people and moved $2,500,000,000 in drugs. Ben's trial in 2017 was a national reckoning held in Sydney under heavy security. He faced charges of drug trafficking, human trafficking, and organized crime. His defense claimed he was a scapegoat, a businessman framed by rivals. But Maria's testimony, alongside Lisa's and Alex's, was a tidal wave. Maria stood in the courtroom, her voice a blade. She spoke of the brothel, the men who laughed as they heard her, the dreams they stole. "You didn't just take my life," she told Ben, her eyes locked on his. "You took my hope." Ben stared back, his face a mask, but the courtroom felt the weight of her words. The evidence, ledgers, survivor accounts, financial records, was overwhelming. In 2018, Ben was sentenced to life without parole, locked in a maximum security. But the story didn't end. Ben's syndicate was too vast, its roots too deep. Lieutenants like Rachel Evans kept the network alive, adapting to digital platforms, dark web marketplaces, encrypted apps. The AFP dismantled fronts, arrested dozens, but new players emerged, feeding Australia's hunger for drugs and cheap labor. Maria, now an advocate, worked with survivors. Her foundation, a lifeline for those rebuilding their lives. She spoke of the women she'd met in that brothel, the ones who didn't escape. "They're still out there," she said, "and I'll fight for them." The numbers were staggering. $3 billion, 0 cents in drugs, 15,000 victims, a web of corruption that touched politicians and police, but it was the human cost that lingered. Families shattered, lives erased, dreams turned to ash. Maria's voice joined a chorus of survivors, their stories a call to action. Australia reformed its laws, tightened borders, and funded victim support, but the scars remained, a reminder of the nation's blind spots. In 2021, a global summit in Sydney marked a turning point. Survivors like Maria spoke, their voices shaping new laws and task forces, but the fight was far from over. Ben's legacy lived in the dark web, in the boats still crossing the sea, in the safe houses where hope died. The AFP hunted the remnants, but the syndicate evolved, a hydra with new heads. Picture that farmhouse, rain pooling in the dirt, Ben's wine glass still on the table. The man is gone, but his system breathes, a shadow that clings to Australia's soul. As we leave Ben Thomas behind, the rain carries us to the final shadow, a man who turned London's streets into a graveyard for the lost. Stay with us, for the darkness has one last tale to tell. Part 5, The Kingpin's Masquerade, Edward Graves. The rain is a relentless murmur now, cloaking the world in a shroud of whispers. In the heart of London, where ancient streets twist beneath neon glow, the city hums with secrets too dark to bear the light. Here, in the early 2000s, one man wove a tapestry of crime so vast it stretched across continents, ensnaring lives in a web of drugs and despair. His name was Edward Graves, a man who wore charm like a mask and wielded power like a blade. To the world, he was a businessman. To the underworld, he was a kingpin, a ghost who trafficked in human souls. This is the story of a criminal empire that turned hope into horror and the survivors who tore it down. Welcome to the shadowed reign of Edward Graves. Edward Graves was not born to crime, but he was drawn to it like a moth to flame. Growing up in the gray outskirts of London in the 1970s, he was a child of poverty, raised in a council estate where dreams were as scarce as sunlight. His father was gone, his mother a seamstress who worked until her fingers bled. Young Edward was quiet, observant, his sharp mind a beacon in the gloom. He saw the dealers on the corner, the pimps in flashy cars, and learned early that power wasn't earned, it was taken. By 16, he was running errands for local gangs, his charm and cunning earning him a place in their world. But Graves wasn't content to serve, he wanted to rule. In his 20s, Graves moved to central London, a city where money and vice danced in the shadows. He started small, fencing stolen goods and moving cannabis, but his ambition was a fire that burned hotter with every deal. By the 1990s, he'd caught the eye of international syndicates, men who trafficked cocaine and heroin across borders. Graves didn't just join them, he studied them, learning the art of smuggling while quietly building his own network. He saw London's global connections, its ports, its banks, its underworld as a chessboard, and he intended to be its king. By 2005, Edward Graves was a kingpin, the architect of a syndicate that moved drugs and people with chilling precision, cocaine from Colombia, Heroin from Afghanistan, methamphetamine from Southeast Asia, all flowed into the UK, hidden in shipping containers, luxury goods, even humanitarian aid crates. Graves' operation was a masterclass in deception. He ran front businesses, import-export firms, textile companies, even a charity that laundered money and masked his crimes. His drugs flooded London's streets, fueling addiction and despair, while his profits built an empire that spanned Europe, Asia, and Africa. But Graves' true horror was human trafficking. He preyed on the desperate, refugees from war-torn regions, impoverished families from Eastern Europe and Africa, young women from Asia seeking a better life. His recruiters, often charismatic men and women trained to lie, promised jobs in the UK, waitresses, cleaners, construction workers. Victims sold everything to pay for passage, only to be smuggled in cargo holds, their passports burned, their lives sold. Women were forced into brothels, men into sweatshops, children into domestic servitude. Graves controlled them with violence, debt, and the threat of deportation, turning hope into a chain. What made Graves untouchable was his masquerade. He lived modestly in a Kensington flat, drove a sensible car, and attended charity galas with a disarming smile. To the world, he was a philanthropist, a vague figure in global trade. To his network, he was a phantom, communicating through encrypted channels and trusted lieutenants like Michael Hawke and Clara Bennett. His syndicate was a hydra, its cells independent, ensuring no single betrayal could topple it. Graves bribed border guards, immigration officers, even MPs, weaving a web of corruption that shielded him from scrutiny. Yet, even the most careful empire has cracks. In 2010, a routine drug bust at Dover's port uncovered a shipment of heroin hidden in a crate of medical supplies. The haul was small, but the paperwork was sloppy, a rare oversight for Graves' machine. The UK's Serious Organized Crime Agency, SOCA, sensed a larger network and launched Operation Eclipse, a task force to hunt the mastermind. They didn't know Graves' name, but they felt his shadow, a force behind London's rising tide of drugs and missing migrants. For 2 years, Sosa chased ghosts. Graves' network was a maze, its threads vanishing into shell companies and coded communications. They seized shipments, arrested couriers, but each lead was a dead end. Graves was always one step ahead, his informants tipping him off to raids, his hackers erasing digital trails. The task force grew desperate, their war room a chaos of maps and photos. They knew the syndicate was trafficking people. Reports of vanished refugees were mounting, but proving it was like grasping at fog. The breakthrough came in 2011, brutal and undeniable. A shipping container at Tilbury docks was opened, revealing a horror that would shake the nation. Inside were 100 kilos of cocaine and the bodies of 15 trafficked women suffocated in a hidden compartment. Some were barely alive, their eyes hollow with terror. The discovery was a national outrage, headlines screaming of a slavery scandal. SOCA, now under public pressure, partnered with Interpol and Europol, vowing to dismantle the syndicate. The container was a crack in Graves' facade, and they intended to pry it open. Forensic teams scoured the container, finding fingerprints, DNA, and a manifest link to a front company in London. SOCA infiltrated the company posing as accountants and uncovered a network of safe houses, basements, back rooms, and derelict flats where victims were held. Raids in Manchester and Birmingham rescued dozens, their stories a litany of despair, promises of jobs, brutal journeys, lives reduced to ledger entries. The task force had proof of human trafficking, but Graves remained a myth, a name no one dared speak. The turning point came from Clara, a 20-year-old from Nigeria. Clara had been lured by a recruiter promising a job as a nanny in London. Instead, she was sold to a brothel, her passport burned, her family threatened. For 2 years, she endured unimaginable abuse until a raid on an unrelated case freed her. Clara's courage was a flame in the dark. She walked into a SOCA office, her voice steady despite her fear, and told her story. The ship, the safe house, a man named Michael with a limp. Clara's testimony was a map. SOCA targeted Michael Hawke, Graves' enforcer, tailing him through London's underworld. Hawke was careful, but a wiretap caught him discussing a shipment, mentioning a boss in Kensington. The task force traced the call to a flat in West London, where they found $10 million, 0 cents in heroin, and 8 trafficked girls, locked in a hidden room. The raid was a blow, but Graves slipped away, warned by a corrupt cop. SOCA was closing in, but Graves was a master of evasion. He moved between safe houses, using false identities and burner phones. The task force, now working with the FBI and Nigerian police, tracked his finances, finding accounts in Cyprus and Dubai. They turned a low-level courier, a scared kid named Jamal, who'd seen Graves at a meeting. Jamal's intel led to a raid in Leeds, where agents seized meth and rescued 5 children, their faces etched with fear. Each bus brought them closer, but Graves was a specter, always one step ahead. In 2012, the final piece fell into place. Michael Hawk, Graves' trusted lieutenant, broke. He'd seen too much bodies in containers, girls in chains, and his conscience snapped. Facing life in prison after a bust in Amsterdam, Hawk made a deal with Interpol. He betrayed Graves for immunity. His information was a gold mine, routes, safe houses, the names of corrupt officials. Hawk didn't know Graves' face, but he knew his habits, his paranoia, his need to control. Hawk's intel led to a series of raids across the UK, dismantling pieces of the syndicate. Saka rescued dozens, seized millions in drugs, but Graves remained elusive. Then, in the summer of 2012, a tip from a rural informant changed everything. Graves was hiding in a countryside estate in Sussex under a false name. On a cool, overcast morning, Saka stormed the property, armed with warrants and resolve. Graves was alone, trying to flee in the dawn light. He didn't resist, didn't speak. The kingpin was cuffed, his masquerade shattered. The estate was a treasure trove, laptops, encrypted drives, and a journal filled with coded notes. Decrypting the data revealed a syndicate that had trafficked 20,000 people and moved $5 billion 0 cents in drugs. Graves' trial in 2013 was a media storm, held in London under tight security. He faced charges of drug trafficking, human trafficking, conspiracy, and corruption. His defense claimed he was a victim, a businessman ensnared by criminals. But Clara's testimony, alongside Hawk's and Jamal's, was a tidal wave. Clara stood in the courtroom, her voice a quiet thunder. She spoke of the brothel, the men who broke her, the dreams they stole. "You didn't just take my body," she told Graves, her eyes burning. "You took my future." Graves stared back, his face a mask of cold indifference, but the courtroom felt the weight of her words. The evidence, ledgers, survivor accounts, financial records, was overwhelming. In 2014, Graves was sentenced to life without parole, locked in a maximum security prison in Belmarsh. But the story didn't end. Graves' syndicate was too vast, its roots too deep. Lieutenants like Clara Bennett kept the network alive, adapting to digital platforms, dark web markets, encrypted apps. Sosa dismantled fronts, arrested dozens, but new players emerged, feeding Europe's hunger for drugs and cheap labor. Clara, now an advocate, founded Reclaiming Freedom, a foundation to help survivors. She spoke of the girls she'd met in that brothel, the ones who didn't escape. "They're still out there," she said, "and I'll fight for them." The numbers were staggering. $6 billion 0 cents in drugs, 25,000 victims, a web of corruption that touched MPs and police. But it was the human cost that lingered. Families shattered, lives erased, dreams turned to ash. Claire's voice joined a chorus of survivors, their stories a call to action. The UK reformed its laws, tightened borders, and funded victim support, but the scars remain, a reminder of the nation's blind spots. In 2017, a global summit in London marked a turning point. Survivors like Clara spoke, their voices shaping new laws and task forces, but the fight was far from over. Graves' legacy lived in the dark web, in the ships still crossing the channel, in the safe houses where hope died. Saka hunted the remnants, but the syndicate evolved, a hydra with new heads. Picture that Sussex estate, rain pooling in the grass, Graves' journal still open on the desk. The man is gone, but his system breathes, a shadow that clings to London's soul. The rain falls harder, carrying the weight of lives lost and lives reclaimed. The darkness has told its tale, but the echoes remain, a reminder that some ghosts never fade. The rain slows now, fading whisper as the night grows still. These stories, Rivera, Morales, O'Keefe, Thomas, Graves, are more than tales of crime, they're mirrors reflecting the shadows within us all. Each empire built on greed and suffering crumbled under the weight of its own sins, yet left scars that time cannot erase. From the deserts of Mexico to the streets of London, these ghosts remind us that evil thrives in silence, feeding on the desperate and the overlooked. But in the darkness, there are voices. Survivors like Anna, Elena, Sarah, Maria, and Clara, who refuse to be silenced. Their courage lights the way, a challenge to a world too often blind to its own wounds. As the rain fades, let these stories linger, a warning to stay vigilant, to listen to the whispers of the past. Thank you for joining us on Shadows of the Past. Sleep if you can, but keep one eye open. The shadows are never far. Until next time, let the darkness keep its secrets, and may you find peace in the light.